President Andrew Jackson, known for his fiery temper and dueling prowess, is leaving a funeral at the Capitol. Now, Jackson wasn't your average president. This guy fought in over 100 duels. He even had a bullet lodged in his chest from one of them. So, you'd think people might hesitate to mess with him, right? Wrong. Enter Richard Lawrence, an unemployed house painter with some seriously misplaced confidence. As Jackson is making his way out, Lawrence pulls out not one, but two pistols. And guess what? Both pistols misfired. Now, if you're wondering about the odds of that happening, it's about 1 in 125,000. But here's where it gets even crazier. Jackson didn't flinch. He charged at Lawrence with his cane. Talk about old school justice. Jackson beat Lawrence until he was subdued. Now here's the kicker. Subsequent tests on Lawrence's pistols showed they were in perfect working order. So, was it sheer luck, divine intervention, or maybe Jackson's legendary stubbornness that saved him? Who knows? But one thing's for sure. If you're going to attempt an assassination, maybe don't pick a seasoned duelist. Baltimore secessionists. Now let's talk about a story so crazy it sounds like something out of a spy novel. Abraham Lincoln, and the alleged plot to assassinate him before he even became president. Yep, you heard that right. Before Honest Abe could even set foot in the White House, Baltimore secessionists were plotting to take him out. These were folks who were none too pleased about Lincoln's anti-slavery stance, and they decided the best way to handle it was to make sure he never made it to Washington. So it's early 1861. Lincoln's just been elected, and he's on a train tour from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, D.C., with stops along the way to meet the people and give speeches. But as Lincoln's train is heading toward Baltimore, he gets a tip-off that there's a plot to assassinate him when he changes trains in the city. But here's where things get wild. A detective named Alan Pinkerton got wind of the plot and immediately sprang into action. Pinkerton devised a secret plan to get Lincoln safely through Baltimore without anyone noticing. Lincoln, the 6'4" towering figure known for his top hat and beard, had to sneak through Baltimore in the dead of night, in disguise. Picture this: the soon-to-be 16th President of the United States, wrapped in a shawl and wearing a soft, low-brimmed hat, slipping through the streets like some kind of 19th century undercover agent. No top hat, no grand speeches, just a quiet, stealthy journey in the middle of the night. To throw off any would-be assassins, Lincoln's handlers sent out a decoy train, complete with a dummy carriage meant to fool anyone who might be keeping an eye out. Meanwhile, the real Lincoln was whisked away on a special night train that bypassed Baltimore altogether. He arrived in Washington, D.C., and simply greeted his security detail with a, "Good morning, gentlemen. John Schrank." It's 1912, and Teddy's on the campaign trail, running for an unprecedented third term as president under the Progressive Party, better known as the Bull Moose Party. Roosevelt, being the larger-than-life character that he was giving speeches left and right, stirring up the crowds with his passionate calls for reform. But not everyone was a fan of Teddy's ambition, particularly one man named John Schrank. Now, Schrank wasn't just any disgruntled citizen. He was a saloon keeper from New York who claimed he was visited by the ghost of William McKinley, who was assassinated in 1901. Supposedly, this ghost told Schrank in a dream that Roosevelt was a threat to America and had to be stopped. Schrank waited for Roosevelt outside the Gilpatrick Hotel. As Roosevelt stepped into his open car, waving to the crowd, Schrank pulled out a .38 caliber revolver and fired. The bullet hit Roosevelt square in the chest. Now here's where it gets wild. Teddy didn't drop. In fact, he barely flinched. You see, Roosevelt's thick overcoat, a metal eyeglass case, and a 50-page speech folded in his breast pocket slowed the bullet down just enough that it didn't penetrate his lung. But make no mistake, the bullet was still lodged in his chest, and he was bleeding. So, what did Teddy do? Did he rush to the hospital? Nope. He calmly assessed the situation, coughed a few times to make sure the bullet hadn't punctured a lung, and proceeded to deliver his 90-minute speech. Giuseppe Zangara, an angry, unemployed Italian immigrant with a stomach ulcer that made him despise rich people, politicians, and frankly, anyone in power. Zangara had decided that he'd had enough of all the suffering in his life, and he was going to make someone pay. So, on February 15, 1933, Zangara found himself in Bayfront Park, Miami, where Roosevelt was giving a speech from the back of a convertible. But here's the twist. Zangara was only 5 feet tall, and there were hundreds of people between him and his target. Zangara wasn't going to let a little thing like height get in his way. He climbed up on a wobbly metal chair, stood on his tiptoes, and aimed his .32 caliber revolver in Roosevelt's direction. Now, here's the part that'll make you shake your head in disbelief. Despite being in a crowd of people and standing on an unsteady chair, Zangara actually managed to get off 5 shots. He missed FDR entirely. Instead, he hit the mayor, who was standing right next to Roosevelt. As Zangara was wrestled to the ground by the crowd, he screamed, "Too many people in the way!" You've got to admire the audacity, right? It's like trying to hit a bullseye in the middle of a stampede and then blaming the stampede when you miss. Oscar and Griselio. 2 Puerto Rican nationalists attempted to storm Blair House, where Truman was staying. Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola decided it was the perfect time to launch an assault on the President of the United States. Their goal? To draw attention to the cause of Puerto Rican independence. Their plan? Well, it was less Ocean's 11 and more like a really bad game of capture the flag. Armed with pistols, they thought they could just walk up, shoot a few guards, and take out the leader of the free world. Easy, right? Wrong. First off, Blair House was crawling with Secret Service agents, and these guys didn't miss a beat. As Collazo approached and pulled out his gun, Secret Service officer Donald Birdsell spotted him, and the chaos began. Collazo managed to get off a few rounds, wounding Birdsell, but then the agents fired back. Collazo, outgunned and outnumbered, was quickly subdued. Meanwhile, across the street, Torresola was having a slightly better time. He managed to fatally wound Officer Leslie Kaufholt, but not before Kaufholt returned fire with a single fatal shot. During this whole gunfight, Truman was napping upstairs. Imagine, bullets are flying, men are literally dying on your doorstep, and you're catching some Z's. The entire incident lasted just 38 seconds. When the dust settled, Torresola was dead, Collazo was captured, and Truman walked away unscathed. Richard Paul Pavlik. Lurking in the shadows was Richard Paul Pavlik, a 73-year-old retired postal worker with a grudge against JFK. He packed his car with dynamite and set off for Palm Beach, Florida, where Kennedy and his family were staying. Pavlik had it all figured out. He'd wait outside the Kennedy residence, and when JFK stepped out, boom, no more president-elect. Now here's the part that will make you do a double take. Pavlik actually stalked Kennedy for days, waiting for the perfect moment. But when that moment finally came, Pavlik saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It wasn't Secret Service agents or the threat of getting caught. Nope, it was JFK stepping out of his house, with his wife Jackie and their young children. For all his madness, Pavlik couldn't bring himself to kill the innocent kids and their mom. He drove away, bomb still in his car, without carrying out his deadly plan. But it gets even crazier. Pavlik didn't give up. He was still determined to take out Kennedy. Fortunately, his erratic behavior had caught the attention of authorities, who were already suspicious of this elderly man driving around with a car full of explosives. They arrested him a few days later, and the full extent of his plot was revealed. Can you imagine? JFK's life was saved by nothing more than a bit of compassion from a man who was otherwise completely unhinged. Lynette Fromm, Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a follower of none other than Charles Manson. That's right, the cult leader whose followers carried out various murders. On September 5, 1975, Fromm decided it was her time to shine. She pulled out a .45 caliber pistol and pointed it right at Ford. The crowd gasped, Secret Service agents tensed, and then, nothing. The gun didn't fire. This wasn't an instance of luck. In fact, it was an instance of pure stupidity. I guess being an insane cultist gives you the memory span of a goldfish. It turns out that Fromm had forgotten to chamber a round before she embarked on her mission. Talk about an embarrassing moment. John Hinckley Jr. Hinckley wasn't your average assassin. No, this guy was on a mission to impress actress Jodie Foster. Yup, you heard that right. He had developed an unhealthy obsession with her after watching the movie Taxi Driver, in which Foster plays a young girl being saved by Robert De Niro's character, who, get this, plots to kill a politician. Hinckley apparently thought that by taking out Reagan, he'd somehow win Foster's heart. Not exactly the most romantic of gestures, but hey, love makes people do crazy things, right? So, Hinckley fires off 6 shots in rapid succession. All of them directly missed Reagan. Instead, Reagan was struck by a ricocheted bullet that lodges itself just an inch from his heart. As they're racing to the hospital, Reagan looks up at the doctors and says, "I hope you're all Republicans." The guy's just been shot, and he's cracking jokes. In a moment straight out of a medical drama, the surgeons managed to save him, and Reagan, never one to miss a chance to lighten the mood, was back on his feet and back to work within weeks. Francisco Martin Duran. Duran had one goal: to make a dramatic statement by turning the White House into a shooting range. So, what does Duran do? He rolls up with a high-powered rifle and starts firing shots from the street. Now, let's be honest. Firing at the White House sounds like a pretty terrible plan, right? But it gets even more surreal. Duran's aim was as off as a broken compass. He didn't exactly hit his target. In fact, he didn't hit anything important at all. Secret Service agents swooped in and tackled Duran to the ground. Here's where things get even crazier. As Duran was being subdued, he was shouting that he was there to take out the president. Can you imagine the chaos? A man, fired up and shouting his intentions as he's wrestled to the ground by Secret Service agents. Meanwhile, President Clinton was completely unharmed and likely sipping his coffee while this unfolds. Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez. Just like the last moron, Oscar's plan was to also fire wildly at the White House in hopes of removing Obama as the president. His aim was as accurate as Duran's. Oscar's attempt at an assassination was nothing more than property damage. After he was done unloading his rounds, he drove off, but not before leaving a trail of evidence and vehicle in plain sight for the police. This genius even left his ID inside the car to make the police's job easier. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 25 years. Here is the hilarious part. Ortega Hernandez didn't exactly pick the best time for his escapade. The first family was actually away from the White House at the time, which means his plan was about as effective as throwing water balloons at a tank. In the end, the incident turned into a comical story of poor aim and even poorer planning. Thomas Matthew Crooks. Thomas Matthew Crooks, a 20-year-old with a name that sounds like a character from a mystery novel, decides he's going to turn Trump's rally into an action scene. Armed with an AR-15 style rifle and perched on the roof of a nearby building, he starts firing shots. Now, Trump isn't exactly known for his low profile, but this time, he really stands out. Literally. Crooks manages to hit him in the upper right ear, of all places. Talk about an unexpected piercing. But Trump, true to form, doesn't just go down quietly. Unfortunately, one audience member was killed, and 2 others were critically injured. Proof that sometimes, reality really is stranger and harsher than fiction. Despite being shot, Trump is captured in a series of iconic photos by Evan Vucci of the Associated Press, looking surprisingly upbeat. Bloodied but unbowed, he's seen pumping his fist in the air and shouting, "Fight!" as if he's rallying his troops in a dramatic comeback scene. These images go viral faster than a cat video, making Trump's recovery look like the plot twist of a blockbuster. Trump is whisked off to the hospital, where he's treated and, in an amazing turn of events, released in stable condition later that same day. Talk about a quick recovery. He's back in the limelight 2 days later, making his first public appearance at the 2024 Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as if nothing ever happened.
If you want to improve your mind and satisfy your hunger for knowledge, evolve your brain by liking and subscribing. Let's advance our intelligence together. I'll see you next time.